Hello there, my name is Nathan Verco. This is a quick video on how to manage your monkey mind. It's an Eastern philosophy thinking of the mind as though it's a monkey swinging from tree to tree. You might be able to relate, quite often people's thoughts jump and skip all over the place and they run away from them a little bit. For example, you might get a text message or a message of some kind through the written form and you interpret it in some way and you create all these thoughts from that little message and you make it mean certain things and you build it and you stay on this thought train where it just gets faster and faster and faster, and then you may see the person who sent the message and you've prepared all these responses and thought about all these things and you have a chat and they're very simply thinking, oh, I didn't mean that at all, I just meant blah blah. And in your mind you might be thinking, you mean just blah blah, right? You just meant just that. I made it mean all these things, and you're saying it's just this. So the mind is very creative and very busy, and I find a lot of people criticize their mind and have judgment about the thoughts that they have. So a quick video on how to manage the monkey mind. So something that a lot of people are very good at is overthinking. Now, my understanding of the physiology is that when your brain is cognitively active, it uses around 80% of the blood's available glucose, aka when the brain is working hard, it chews through heaps of energy. So not only when you're overthinking do you get tired, but it also can break things down. It can break down the important things a little bit. Sometimes when you marinate and ruminate, when you reflect a little too much, I'll work on my pronunciation, of some of the thoughts that you have, they can fall apart. Okay, so what happens with overthinking? One of the most important things you can do is a little expression which I love here, which came to me many years ago. Think, then do, don't stew. Think, then do, don't stew. Now, I don't know if you've ever made a crock pot or a slow cooker, whatever you call it, where you throw the meat and the veg, etc. in a pot and you leave it for a day. The purpose of that is so that the meat becomes nice and tender. Apologies, vegetarians. Mushrooms, when the mushrooms become nice and tender. And if the purpose of that is for it to become tender, if you leave it too long, if you marinate too long, if you stew it too long, all the meat, aka mushrooms, fall apart. And then it meshes in with the veggies and you can't really recognise it. So you can't really differentiate your thoughts and parts of yourself that are important because you've stewed on it too much. So a beautiful way to be responsible to your thoughts and your overthinking is to give yourself the opportunity to have 3 thoughts. Thought, 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 and then there must be an action. So for every 3 thoughts, there must be an action. It could be very simply, pop something on the to-do list. It could be send a message. Get up and make something happen. It's okay to think, but you must hold yourself responsible to your thinking by having 3 thoughts and then taking action. So think, then do, don't stew. First little step there. Overthinking is kind of like if you had a rocking chair. If you're sitting in a rocking chair, well, when you're sitting in a rocking chair, there's lots of movement happening. Rocking back and forward, right? But if you want to try and get to town in a rocking chair, it's not a very effective way. So rocking back and forward in a rocking chair, there's a whole lot of movement going on, but you're not really getting anywhere. So that's what overthinking might be likened to, just to have a little bit of a chuckle about how to understand what's going on in your mind a little bit more. It could also be likened to, this is a car, by the way. I scribbled that up very quickly. No, that's a lie. I actually practice these diagrams. So the car, the wheels are spinning, right? So there's no traction. There's a whole lot of movement going on, but not much traction. And so if you had a mind that talked all the time, right? Maybe you can relate. Maybe you know someone who, okay, you, sure. So your mind's talking all the time. If you had a mind that was all over the place, should I do this, or should I, oh, did I leave that off? Did I put that on? I should do that. I'm wondering if, I think they're thinking that blah, blah, right? So you have a mind that's all over the place, and you have a mind that beats you up, so good at beating you up. If you had a hand, let's say if you had a hand that did those 3 things, talked all the time, is all over the place, and beats you up, what would you do with that hand? Now, a lot of people say to me over the years, they say, Nathan, I would cut the hand off. Right, okay, good. So, that's maybe an initial response. Hands, however, are very useful. Hands are very useful. So you wouldn't cut the hand off. You'd learn to train the hand, manage the hand, not control the hand. Controlling takes lots of energy And if you try to come from a place of control, external control, the more you push, the more resistance you get. I don't know if you've ever tried to not think a thought. It doesn't work very well because whatever you focus on expands, okay? So coming from that controlling place, it's not the most effective use of energy. So how I want you to think about managing your mind is those two key words, managing and training, okay? So learning to manage and train your mind. Something that people find very refreshing to reflect on in regards to their thoughts and their mind running away from them is to focus on the fact that you are not your mind. Your mind is something that you have. You are not your thoughts. Your thoughts are something that your mind does and does very well, consistently, all the time. And so reflect on the fact that your mind is something that you have. It is not who you are. Your brain is a thought generator. It's a thought generator, and it's very good at generating thoughts. It generates thoughts all day long about everything all the time. And it can make things mean things. And so, I mean, this can be measured with the endoencephalogram, so you can, stick some things on your head and you actually see the brain generating thoughts. And so sometimes some of those thoughts, we judge ourselves for the thoughts we have. So we might think, maybe some insight into my psychology, I should watch myself. So maybe you think, gosh, that person's really frustrated me. I feel like letting their tires down, right? Or I've never done that, just mostly joking. Gosh, they looked at me like that, so that means they blah, blah, and they know that they think that they should blah, blah, right? It gets complicated. So the thought's constantly thinking. And so if you had a puppy like this that was all over the place and would beat you up and it was constantly, wanting to chew on something, you would learn to train that puppy, okay? So the mind is very much like a puppy, until, of course, you learn to manage it and train it. And then it can turn into a Zen monk. And so if you had a puppy that would chew on everything and hump the dog next door and run all over the place and poo in where it shouldn't, just a dog that's out of control, you learn to train that puppy. And so it's important initially in those early stages of learning to manage your mind, which is a wonderful tool, that the brain loves to be busy, just like a puppy. And if it doesn't have something to chew on, then it's going to chew on things it probably shouldn't. You know what I'm saying? So make sure you give it something to play with. Make sure you give your brain something to chew on. And so that's why it's really important to identify your values and what's most important to you so you can focus on what's most important. So your brain can just focus on that. Okay, get the reticular activating system happening in your brain, and so that wherever your attention is going, that's where your energy is flowing. So you might think of your mind like a garden, and you are the gardener. This is probably one of my favourite analogies. So your mind is like a garden. If you don't intentionally plant things in your garden, what automatically grows? Weeds. Weeds automatically grow. So if you do nothing with your garden, good things don't naturally grow. Now, good things as in fruit trees or herbs or flowers or whatever is important to you. This is not to... This is something in the research called the negativity bias. Okay, so the reason why in your garden, your mind, if you don't intentionally plant positive things, weeds naturally grow. Because the purpose of the brain and the mind is to protect you from threats and to keep you safe. If the mind had its way and was running the whole place and you didn't kind of have the heart involved, and I mean that scientifically, there's some cool research around that, and it wasn't balanced out, the mind is kind of running rampant. The mind, I'm pretty sure, look, maybe it's just me, but the mind would probably just have you safe at home in a climate-controlled environment where all the doors are locked, everything's safe, the fridge is stocked, maybe in your room with the door locked and a blanket over your head, wishing you could go home. So you've got to manage the brain with the love in mind that the brain is a busy little thing that's there to protect you. We don't really have physical threats now in this modern age, but the brain is very old in terms of, in the past, when you're walking around you might see a saber-toothed tiger, or in the place where we would sleep, and we might find a safe place like in a tree or in a cave. You can't really lock the door, yeah? So there is a constant physical threat, and so the brain would pay attention to all the little things. It would pay attention to when there's movement. Yeah? It will pay attention when something is different. It will pay attention when something is not how you expected. So it's constantly in alert mode. And so that's why it's just important to respect the history of the brain. So with your garden where weeds automatically grow because there's a negativity bias, because your brain wants to protect you and keep you safe and away from threat, it's very important that you intentionally plant in your brain, in your mind, every single day, things that you've identified are important to you. So the metaphor for that might be, planting herbs, planting flowers, hedges, rose bushes, fruit trees, ground covers. And as you intentionally plant those things, what happens over time is that you need to do less weeding. As you fill your garden with that which is important to you, there is less weeding to do because there are less room for weeds to grow. So the metaphor of your mind being like a garden highlights that your mind is 100% suggestible. We can influence ourselves very distinctly. That can work for you or it can work against you, because the mind in a garden is like a two-edged sword. It can be used to hurt or it can be used to heal. Sometimes I watch a movie and it doesn't quite go where I was hoping it would go. Maybe it's a little bit heavier or darker or unnecessary, with the sex, drugs and rock and roll, and often violence too. And so I need to shut it off, because it's very important that you manage what goes into your brain. Just to highlight to you that your brain is 100% suggestible and that you can actually train it to work for you, just like a good little puppy, have you ever had that moment where you are writing something, or maybe text messaging or typing, and you hear something on the radio or somebody's talking to you or whatever, and they interrupt your thought process, and you start writing or typing or etc. messaging that thing that you just heard, and then you're like, oh bugger, and you have to delete it, right? So that's a really good example of how our brain is 100% suggestible to the stimulus around us. Another example is where the mirror neurons kick into things, where you might know someone who, or you heard of the fact that if someone goes and hangs out in a different culture, there's a different accent, so maybe it's in South Africa, and they go and hang out in South Africa, and then they come back to Australia, and I tried, and they have a South African accent, even though they might be from Australia. And so our brain adjusts and takes in the environment a lot. And so it's important to honour that and use it to your benefit, to your well-being. And one of the important precepts for as you create change and as you plant seeds in your mind, you actually want to be there to grow, whether it's having funny video playlists that help break your state, or whether it's using music and having different playlists for different emotions you want to be in, so like relax time or like fire up time, right? Crank it time, whatever, concentration time, whether it's hanging out with certain people or educating yourself in certain ways. However you surround yourself in your environment, however you choose to implement that change, this is what I want you to remember. Start small, build tall. Something small is better than nothing at all. That's all, folks.